Hey, this is Chris Duffin at Elite Performance Center, and today we're going to be talking about groin health for those that both wide stance squat and sumo deadlift. So it's an important topic because if you're doing both of those, and especially doing them every week, it puts a lot of strain on the adductor and in this groin area where we've got low blood flow. And so you need to know how to manage that, recover from that. And I'm speaking from experience here. I had a pretty dramatic adductor tear a few years ago that I recovered from. But working through that process is how I learned some of these things and what works and what doesn't. So there's three things that we're going to talk about today. First one being, what can you do in your workout to mitigate risk and improve recovery? What can you do in training to stimulate recovery? So we're going to do some high rep stuff there to stimulate blood flow and recovery. And then also we're going to do some prehab, rehab type movements. So this could be really long, so I'm going to pick one thing from each of those that is my favorite, and we're going to talk about that. So first, we're going to start with what I think is actually one of the most important topics, and that is if you're going to be doing both of those every week, you want to look at doing some passive compression. So we use passive compression in a couple different ways here at EPC. So I'll talk about one of the other ways really quick, and we're going to dive into passive compression in further videos in the future. But sometimes we've got people, like, let's say, with some knee pain, and it might be related to issues from the hip or the core that we're working on as we're developing that. There's two things that could be happening. They still have either tension, actual tension in there, or that could be that nerve pathway is still firing really hard and sending those pain sensations. So a lot of times we'll use some passive compression, either above or below the joint. So we're talking about a knee, and you may be having some caving because of the pain or the tension in there, and like on a sumo deadlift, and we may apply here or there, and immediately it'll shut that down and allow them to get in the proper positions to train, that's critical. You've got to be able to move correctly. In this instance, we're actually doing the compression up here. So you can see here, I've got the hammy bands on that Mark sells. I love these things. You can also use a floss band, but let's provide some clarity here. So this here is not occlusion training. This is not flossing. So occlusion training, people are working on trying to restrict blood flow and then have blood flow come back. Voodoo flossing or flossing is an entirely different subject. So that's why I like these hammy bands, is because they're great because you don't have to worry about putting too much tension on there. You can get them set just the right way, leave them on through your workout while you're doing your squats or your pulls. And it has a very huge impact on the ability to reduce the risk for injury and also enhance your recovery capability, especially if you're doing that a couple weeks and not causing as much damage. So this next piece here is what you would be doing before a workout. So I highly recommend you also take a look at my glute ham activation video series. So that's something that also plays a big role in this. But it's got a test and retest methodology approach with it. And I actually do this same movement a lot within that series, but it's a little bit more technical. That's why I didn't show it in that series. So we're going to go through it now. And this is actually a hip adjustment tool. So it's a self-adjustment tool. So if your hip is out of adjustment, you'll feel a pop in it and it actually reseating. So obviously that's a pretty critical piece if you're doing heavy loaded movement, particularly with a wider stance, putting some strain on those hips. But this also works really effectively at that glute VMO balance and also actively opening up that groin.
It's okay, let's keep going.
Okay. So we're going to step into that, and this is called the hip airplane. And I want you to be very cognizant of a couple things. We want to watch the movement on the hip, so don't watch too much the rotation on the upper body or in the leg, or don't focus on those things. And I'll talk through it more as I'm doing the movement. The next thing that we want to be aware of is you want to be slow, purposeful, and deliberate with your movement. Be very aware of what you're doing and how you're moving. So if you're starting to move fast through any of these motions, slow it down, gain control of that. Often that's a sign that you have an issue in wherever that range of motion is. So basically we're going to get up on a 45 degree angle on top of our hip. And we're going to make sure we're going to have a nice stacked core. Hey, Corley. Can you go see Briley while I'm filming? Please? You want to stay here? Okay. You can stay here, but you got to stand back a little ways, okay? So that Daddy can, you can stand right here, okay? All right. Perfect. If you start moving fast through any portion of that, that's a possible sign that, Riley, no! Okay. Let me try again. Yeah. Okay. No noise, Briley. I'm almost done. So as we're doing this movement, we want to be very cognizant and aware of our body position and very purposeful with our movement. So be very aware of yourself and how you're moving. And if you're moving fast through any of the parts of the movement, you want to slow that down and gain control. That's typically telling you that there's something wrong there and you're trying to move fast through that area of movement. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our body up on a 45 degrees on top of this hip. And we're going to have a nice stacked core, rib cage pulled in. We want to think about good quality movement, just like we do in all our other movements. So a lot of the same cueing is going to come into play here. And boom, I'm going to have a slight bend in my knee here, and I'm at a 45 here. When you start, you may want to reach out and touch something. So this is something that looks very easy, but it takes a little bit to get the balance down. And then you're basically going to take the body and rotate it about on top of the hip. So I'm going to get here. I'm actually quite a bit tighter doing this than I have been in the last couple years. So probably, well, it's a good time to show you some of the things I was talking about. It's because I've been squatting with knee sleeves instead of knee wraps for the last 2 weeks, which I'm not used to. And there's less support in the hole, which is time of putting more strain on that adductor. And I can really feel it as I do this today. And you can see those fast parts if you watch me here where I'm kind of moving through some certain areas really fast, and that's exactly what I was talking about. And you'll see that I get a little bit more consistent as I become aware of that as I'm doing this. Now, as you're opening and closing the hip here, you want to actually move, as I open up, I want to move my knee on the leg that's on the floor away from my body, so I'm opening up the hip more, and move it towards my body as I'm closing right here. And you can think about these two movements here as alternating between a skier position right here and bowler position. So those are the two positions that we're alternating between there. And again, remember, open the hip, so the knee should be moving the opposite direction. So either towards your body as you're trying to close and away as you're trying to open up. And you can see how it's easy to get lost in twisting the torso or moving the leg and not actually moving about the hip. So be aware of that. So here is what we're doing to stimulate blood flow. Now watch the initiation of the movement. The camera doesn't really show how much the knee is going outside of the shoulder here. But look, every time I initiate this movement, watch that knee, and you'll see that it's driving out. So I'm driving this out further than kind of what I would do if I was squatting. And it's staying outside of that shoulder and really hitting that groin area. There's a lot of risk in that, so that's why I don't go heavy. You can see I've got a little block down there, that 2x4, to stop this from going too deep, to make sure that I'm, if I get in a fatigue state, I'm not going to get in a point where I can injure myself. And again, you can see that, again, that knee is dropping outside that shoulder. Doesn't look quite as far as it is here on the video, but you can see that initiated movement there. And I do this one leg at a time to make it even more challenging. Make sure you're not loading up into the core too much. That leg should not be coming in contact with the belly at all. So you want to pull it and drift it to the outside of that. High reps, 16 to 20 reps. Sets can vary from 2 to 4. You can do this post squat workout. You can do it on another day of the week to stimulate recovery and really focus on hypertrophy style training to develop that area.